Chapter 1. The Model. Everyone applauds without reading the footnotes. Singapore loves to present itself as proof that geography does not matter, history does not matter, and even population does not matter. No natural resources? No problem. Small domestic market? Irrelevant. Aging locals? Just import smarter humans. On paper, it looks flawless. When something breaks, Singapore does not waste time fixing the system. It replaces the people. Engineers from India, finance professionals from Europe, tech workers from China, nurses from the Philippines, construction workers from Bangladesh, academics from everywhere else who can still tolerate humidity and compliance forms. The narrative is clean and comforting. Talent flows in, productivity rises, GDP grows, everyone wins. Economists clap politely. Consultants nod like dashboard toys. And for a while, it works. Of course it works. Any system looks brilliant when it is allowed to cherry-pick the top performers of other countries without paying the full social cost of raising them. Singapore did not educate these people from kindergarten. It did not fund their childhood health care. It did not carry the cost of their failed early careers. It imports them at peak efficiency, like buying a pre-assembled machine and skipping the factory stage. That is not immoral. It is rational. But here is the uncomfortable question that rarely gets asked out loud. What happens when everyone tries to do the same thing? Because Singapore is not importing talent in a vacuum. It is competing against the United States, Canada, Australia, the UK, the EU, and increasingly even China and the Gulf states. Every country with money and declining birth rates has discovered the same trick. And suddenly, this is no longer a clever strategy. It is an auction. Talent goes where the pay is highest, the taxes are lowest, the visas are easiest, and the future feels safest. Loyalty is not part of the equation. Gratitude is not a policy lever. Singapore's entire growth story quietly assumes one thing: that global talent will always choose Singapore. Forever. That assumption has never been tested in a truly hostile global environment, not during geopolitical fragmentation, not during visa nationalism, not during housing backlash, not during social fatigue among locals who feel replaced rather than upgraded. The model works brilliantly as long as the tap never turns off. Chapter 1 is not about whether Singapore is smart. It obviously is. The real question is whether building a country on permanent talent inflow is resilience, or just delayed risk with better branding. Chapter 2. When talent stops being a complement and starts being a threat. At some point, importing talent stops sounding like progress and starts sounding like replacement. That moment is subtle. Governments never announce it. Locals just feel it in their bones. Rents go up faster than wages. Job postings quietly switch from Singaporeans preferred to global experience required. Interviews become shorter. Rejections become vaguer. The message is never explicit, but it is very clear. You are good. Just not competitive enough anymore. This is where Singapore's model begins to develop hairline cracks. Not economic ones, social ones. The kind spreadsheets do not register until they are already fractures. Highly skilled migrants are not guests, they are competitors. They are younger, hungrier, often willing to work longer hours for the same pay because they are arbitraging currencies, passports, and futures. That is not their fault. That is the system working exactly as designed. But locals do not experience this as global optimization. They experience it as displacement. The government response is always the same: upskill, reskill, adapt, be global, be competitive, be flexible, be realistic, be grateful. This advice sounds reasonable until you notice who never hears it. The imported elite do not need to reskill. They were imported because they already fit. So the burden of adjustment falls almost entirely on locals. Mid-career workers, older professionals, people with mortgages, parents, and roots, people who cannot simply leave if the equation turns unfavorable. Here is the dangerous irony. The more aggressively Singapore imports talent to stay competitive, the more it risks hollowing out the psychological contract with its own citizens. A country is not just a platform, it is a promise. When locals begin to feel that their value is conditional and temporary, something shifts. Trust erodes, patience thins. The social glue weakens, quietly, politely, and very efficiently. You do not see riots, you see withdrawal, lower fertility, risk aversion, a growing obsession with property as the only safe asset, a population that becomes careful instead of ambitious. That is not a collapse. It is worse. It is stagnation disguised as stability. And this is where Singapore starts to resemble places it does not like being compared to, countries that once believed efficiency alone could replace belonging. Chapter 2 is not arguing that importing talent is wrong. It is arguing that importing talent forever, without redefining who the country is actually for, creates a slow, invisible stress test. And stress tests always fail somewhere unexpected. Chapter 3. The global talent market is not loyal to you. Singapore often speaks about attracting and retaining talent as if talent were a well-trained pet. Feed it well, give it air conditioning, and it will stay forever. That is adorable. Talent does not settle. Talent arbitrages. It moves like capital, not like citizens. It follows yield, safety, mobility, and upside. The moment those variables shift, it leaves. Quietly, efficiently, without nostalgia. This is the core risk Singapore underestimates. The country's talent strategy assumes relative stability in the global order. Open borders for skilled labour, predictable geopolitics, friendly visa regimes. A world where English-speaking, rule-based hubs are permanently attractive. That world is already cracking. The US is tightening immigration while offering absurdly high compensation at the top end. The EU is becoming more protectionist, but still magnetizes research and creative elites. China is no longer just exporting talent, it is retaining and repatriating it. The Gulf states are throwing tax-free money at professionals with fewer questions and fewer social constraints. Suddenly, Singapore is not competing with struggling countries anymore. It is competing with aggressive ones. And here is the uncomfortable truth. Singapore's biggest advantage is also its biggest weakness. It is optimized, not loved. People come to Singapore for safety, order, money, and efficiency. They do not come for cultural gravity. They do not come for long-term identity. They do not come thinking, this is where I want my grandchildren to belong. That matters more than policymakers admit. Because when the world becomes unstable, people do not just ask, where is best right now? They ask, where will protect me when things go wrong? Talent with optionality will choose countries that offer not just income, but narrative. Citizenship pathways that feel meaningful. A sense of future that goes beyond spreadsheets. Singapore offers permanent residence, but emotional permanence is harder to manufacture. You cannot fast-track belonging the way you fast-track visas. So the risk is not that talent disappears overnight. The risk is selective erosion. The most mobile, most valuable people are the first to leave when conditions change. That leaves behind exactly what Singapore cannot afford. A thinner elite, rising competition at the mid-level, and locals squeezed harder to compensate. At that point, importing more talent does not solve the problem. It accelerates the churn. Chapter 3 is not saying Singapore will suddenly lose its appeal. It is saying that a strategy built on permanent global desirability assumes a world that no longer exists. And systems built for yesterday's world usually fail very politely, then very quickly. Chapter 4. Importing talent is not a future. It is a delay mechanism. Here is the part that makes policymakers uncomfortable. Importing talent is not a growth model. It is a time-buying strategy. It works best when a country has clarity about what it is delaying for. Singapore has been delaying demographic decline, wage pressure, and social rigidity with remarkable efficiency. But delay only has value if something structural is being rebuilt underneath. The real danger is not that Singapore imports too much talent. It is that importing talent becomes a substitute for fixing deeper issues. Education stratification, middle-aged career ceilings, psychological burnout among locals, a system that rewards compliance more than originality. As long as global talent keeps arriving, these problems can be managed rather than solved. GDP still looks good, headline unemployment stays low, international rankings remain fluttering. The machine hums. But machines that rely on external inputs are fragile by definition. What happens if global mobility slows? What happens if housing backlash turns political? What happens if locals decide the social contract is no longer fair? What happens if the next generation grows up believing the safest move is not ambition, but exit? At that point, importing talent stops being a strength and starts being a crutch. Countries that last do not just attract talent, they grow it, forgive it, fail it, and keep it anyway. They create citizens, not just residents. They accept inefficiency in exchange for continuity. Singapore has always chosen precision over messiness. That choice built the country. It may also limit its future. So the real question is not, can Singapore import talent forever? Of course it cannot. No country can. The real question is whether Singapore uses this borrowed time to evolve into a place where people stay because they belong, not because the numbers still work. If it does, importing talent becomes a supplement. If it does not, importing talent becomes a dangerous bet against the one thing no city-state can afford to lose: its own people.